Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this presentation on Reltio Integration Hub. And specifically, we're going to talk about recipes. So in this session, I'm going to build a recipe live and take some questions on various aspects. So this is in continuation with what we did a couple of weeks back, wherein we announced the launch of Reltio Integration Hub. So before I get into the details of the recipes, I just want to set some context as to why Reltio Integration Hub, for folks who are new to this presentation, might want to hear about this. So, this is what our problem that we're going to solve, right? So today in the enterprise IT landscape, many organizations are struggling with problems caused by data silos, and that is created because of the proliferation of various applications used by those organizations. So we are seeing more and more applications being deployed by the companies, and the reason being that the companies want to use more and more cloud applications, which are best of breed, solving a specific business need. And to augment to that, there is ease of procurement, deployment, use them, and even to decommission them, right? If you don't like something, you could easily decommission them. And this is an industry trend wherein you can hear from various analysts as well who talk about the proliferation of these applications running in a business or an organization. And this results into multiple problems. The first one is that there are multiple copies of data being available across these applications, whether in cloud or on-premise, right? Covering different areas of businesses or processes like marketing automation, Salesforce automation, analytics, if you're using some sort of an ERP, and so on, right? And all these applications ultimately need to be integrated, right? And the point-to-point integration between these applications do not work. I mean, business problems or business processes become inefficient. Delivering inside out of the data becomes hard, and providing a uniform customer experience, across various channels and across various channels becomes a challenge. So these are some of the problems that we set out to kind of solve through Reltio. And how we do this is, you can see Reltio right in the middle of all these applications, and that help you create and provide that single source of truth, that clean, trusted foundation of master data. It unifies data across multiple applications, across different categories, and then provide that trusted, unified data across various data elements like customer, supplier, products, and various others, right? And by doing this, we enable businesses to increase efficiency across processes, enable simpler management of risk and compliance, and we support this by providing the same consistent view of data across systems. And one of the key things all of this involves is integration, right? Bringing data from various sources into Reltio and then derive that unified, consistent view of data and distribute it into the to the subsequent systems, right? So till now, we have been using various tools, the Reltio provided APIs, but we ventured out and tried to solve this integration problem by simplifying the integration and bringing all the data sources into Reltio through Reltio Integration Hub. And that is what we launched through our 21.3 release. So Reltio Integration Hub is our toolkit. It's a low-code, no-code integration platform that is powered by Vocato. That sits within the Reltio platform itself, and it enables business users, citizen integrators to build out integrations to various applications to either bring data into Reltio or capture data out and distribute it into the downstream systems. What you get is thousands of connectors and pre-built recipes out of the community, which you can easily deploy onto your Reltio Integration Hub and get a head start on building that integration, right? And since it's a centralized tool, the monitoring and administration of the integrations is inbuilt, right? It's available for all the citizen integrators, and right, publicly available so that you can monitor what's going on with respect to various integrations that you have, right? And the good part is that since it's a part of the platform, there's no additional cost that is um, applied to the customers to get started on it. However, there is some sort of a usage-based pricing beyond the entitlements that you might have for using Reltio Integration Hub, right? Um, so to talk about some of the examples that I'm going to take you through into this demo is this first scenario of a lead qualification or a prospecting scenario. So what I'm doing right now is let's say you have various systems like a HubSpot or any of the Salesforce automation system or a marketing automation system wherein you capture leads, right? And then you could also have various other applications like an application used by your dealers or channel partners. You might have a website or social media through which you might want to capture those leads, or even some other applications that are distributed across your partners who could capturing the leads. So the scenario here that I'm going to demo or build is, you want to capture lead coming in from various sources, distributed or rather made available on the Reltio, wherein a data steward might do deduplication. Whenever a new organization gets created, you might want to find out whether that organization already is available or not. There's some sort of enrichment that could be done, some housekeeping, cleansing the data, right? And then once and as part of the enrichment or even deduplication, if there are any additional records that it needs to be merged through, you could do that. And then finally, there's a qualification that could be done by the data steward and distributed back into these same applications or any downstream applications like an ERP or a Salesforce automation, so that you have a qualified lead that you can work through, right? So a simple scenario, but a relevant one, which a lot of our customers use today to kind of do lead qualifications and prospecting within Reltio. Right. So before I jump onto the system and show how you build this integrations, there are certain aspects that we need to consider while building out these integrations. And this is in general guidance on a high level, right, but might change based on the scenarios that you might have, right? So the first thing that, before you try to build this integration is ask yourself or ask your business as to what problem are you going to solve with this integration, right? Which would lead to a few answers, like what tasks and processes are you automating, right? What is the data that you want to bring into Reltio? So, right, so this would basically give you some guidance on the problem that being solved. At the same time, the applications that are being integrated with Reltio, right? So you need to know what is the source of the data, or whether you are going to distribute that data into a destination systems, right? What is the event source? How is that event going to trigger, and you want to capture that within the integration, right? How is that data going to be mapped? At the same time, you should also ask questions like, what are the business rules or logic that you need to implement during that integration process, right? Whether it's a simple data sync scenario, what kind of transformation or validation or even enrichment you would want to do before you bring in data into Reltio, or after the data gets into Reltio. How time sensitive that process is going to be, whether you want to generate that event or trigger that recipe or the integration in a near real-time basis, or you want that recipe to be polling for a certain event and then start at a certain frequency, or do you want to schedule that job at a certain time period, and whether you want to load that data in batch or in bulk, right? So all these are some of the considerations that you need to consider, when you are building these integrations. And one of the important aspects before you jump onto the system and build out that integration is to identify all the exceptions or errors that might occur, right? Whether it's timeout, rate limits, and how you want to respond to those errors, right? Whether you want to send out an alert notifications, or if there are mechanisms to retry that job or rerun that job, you want to automate that rerun. So documenting these considerations before you build out an integration between the source and the destination makes it a lot easier for you to build out and create that integration of recipe. And again, this is just a guidance, something that I follow and I recommend people to kind of follow while building out integrations through Reltio Integration Hub. Right. So within Reltio Integration Hub, the crux or the heart of any integration is the recipes, right? And recipes can be built by anybody, all right, whether it's a citizen integrator, a business user, or even an IT developer can easily build these integrations, right? Since it's a low-code, no-code tool, it's more of a flowchart mechanism, right? So you can build these integrations in hours or in certain cases in days, but never in weeks or months like typically any of the other integration projects take, right? The integrations could be as simple as replicating data from one system to another system, or it could be as complex as building a data pipeline where you might want to do a lot of orchestration, a lot of complex logic needs to be built in, right? And to help you out build these integrations, there are community applications, connectors, as well as pre-built recipes available, right, which you can use to get start with and just deploy those connector or the recipe from the community into your workspace, as we call it, and then modify it according to your requirements. And since these recipes are completely serverless, they run within their own container, they can scale as the data load goes up, right? So a lot of ease has been built into this application. At the same time, the complexities as well as the performance has been taken care of by abstracting everything within the underlying infrastructure, right? So within a recipe, there are a couple of components that you kind of work with. So there are two building blocks. One is the trigger, and trigger is nothing but the event that starts a recipe, right? It could be let's say a button event, or it could be a real-time event. It could be some sort of a polling or a schedule event that could trigger this recipe. And then there are a bunch of actions that you can perform within the recipe, and these bunch of actions could be the actual workflow or the actual automation of replicating the data from one system to another system, as well as the orchestration that we want to build within the recipe, right? So some of the aspects within the recipes are, as I mentioned, these are event-based, right? So any recipe would be triggered based on a certain event, and these events could be real-time scheduled, and it could process bulk or batch jobs, right? There are various kind of logic that you can build, whether it comes to looping, branching, error handling, and even exception handling. You could connect to any of the applications available, whether it's on-prem, cloud. As long as there's a connector available, you can connect to this application. But at the same time, if there are no connectors available, there are generic connectors like HTTP. So that if your application supports some sort of an API consumption, then you can use those HTTP connectors to connect to those applications and build out those recipes, right? So enough of the presentation. Now I want to jump onto the system and show how you build this recipe. And before I do that, I just want to check with Chris if there are any questions that I can take, or I can jump onto the presentation.
Sorry, there are no questions at the moment.
Okay.
So let's go.
Okay, so so again, before I jump onto the recipe, this is just our Reltio account, and you can find Integration Hub as part of the app launcher, right? It's also available within the console application, right? And again, there are so in case you want to enable Reltio Integration Hub into your accounts, there are a couple of things that you might have to do. The first one is reach out to your customer success manager and ask them to get you the details about how to enable Integration Hub. Customer success manager would reach out to you with the details. You will have to sign an additional contract for consuming Integration Hub, since it's being powered by Workato. There's an additional pass-through contract that needs to be signed, and once that is done, we will be able to provision Reltio Integration Hub for your account. So once you do that, you land up into this page. We call this as Workspace. And there are various aspects that you can see. On the left-hand side, you see the navigation bar. The first one is the recipes, which is where you will build out the integrations with. This is where we will spend most of our time, and that's why I'll come to this later. But at the same time, what you can also do is within the dashboards, right? You can monitor what's going on within your tenant in terms of the health of the various with recipes or the integrations, right? So here you can see the number of jobs that have been successful, the number of recipes that have been deployed are running, as well as the tasks that are being consumed, right? And if you scroll down, you can get into those details of each of these recipes as to which ones have failed and why they have failed, and monitor these recipe jobs in case you want to get into those details, right? Connected apps is nothing but the various applications that you have integrated with. So here you can see there's a HubSpot account that we have integrated with, a Clearbird or a Confluent Cloud for Kafka-based integrations, right? So any application that you use within your recipe requires a connection to be built, and the connection is nothing but a technical connection along with the credentials that you need to supply, right? So this is where you kind of manage all the application connections at one place. A community library is a good one, wherein you can find all the pre-built recipes that are available out there, built by Vocato partners, Vocato customers, and even Reltio partners and customers in future, right? And the way you can search for these recipes is based on the target or the system that you're going to connect with, right? So for example, if I want to look for all the recipes that connect to Salesforce, ServiceNow, this is where you will find all the recipes, and then you can easily install these recipes into your application and then use it to connect to Reltio, right? At the same time, there are custom connectors available. So in case you want to look for a connector that you want to connect with, let's say for example Drift or Pardot or Fresh Service, you can get literally hundreds of various custom connectors that you can use to connect to the various applications, right? And then there are a bunch of tools that are available, like the recipe lifecycle management, an API platform, or even lookup tables. We'll not get into much deeper for this demo, but then these tools kind of augment the entire experience of building those integrations, right? So now let's jump on to the recipe and try to build out a recipe from scratch, right? So create a recipe. Let's say I'm going to integrate with HubSpot to kind of build this integration with, right? So once you build this integration out, so as I mentioned, there are two building blocks. The first one is the trigger that would start this recipe, and then the actions, right? And the trigger would depend on the connector or the application that you are going to connect to, right? And there are various different kinds of triggers that are available, right? So to give you an example, ServiceNow, right? So suppose I was going to use a ServiceNow, there are various kind of connectors of triggers available. So as soon as a new record is created, this trigger, this would generate an event, and the recipe would be triggered, right? At the same time, there's a new record in a real-time basis, a new record in a batch basis, right? So there are various type of triggers being considered, right? So for now, let's use the HubSpot, because that's going to be our source of data, like the lead, right? And in this case, once I've selected the connector that I'm going to connect this recipe with, next one is the trigger, right? And in this case, what I'm going to do is, as soon as a new contact is getting created or a contact is getting updated, I want to replicate that data into Reltio, right? So I'm going to select this one, but you can see there are various other connectors that are available, whether it's new or updated deal, new or updated record.
A quick
So
question,
once I do
Guarav,
that,
before you get too involved in that, and I know that everybody's here for that, but can we call Reltio API and parse the output and store the results using Integration Hub?
Yes, so that's what we will come to when it comes to actions, right? So what we're going to do is, or in fact, I'm going to do another demo as well, wherein we're going to parse some of those responses and then consume that response. But then you can already see in this example as well that we're going to parse the output of this trigger and then convert it into some sort of a way we can consume it into Reltio.
Great, yeah.
And so that's going to be built in with every recipe. Yeah.
Thanks, Guarav.
Okay. So as next step, you need to establish a connection to the system, right? So I'm not going to create a new save this new connection, but just to show an example over here, let's say if I want to create a new connection, you can give a name, and when you say connect, it will open up the HubSpot application, and I can choose the account that I want to connect to, and then the Vocato would connect to this HubSpot. Now, again, this kind of connectivity depends on the connector that you are going to use, right? So this is the way it has been established with HubSpot. For Salesforce, it could be something different. For Reltio, it's different, and we'll come to that as well, right? So it all depends on how that connector has been built. The connectivity can be established then, whether it's OAuth or some sort of a user credentials, right? So I'm not going to do that. I've already created a new connection already, so I'm going to use this one. And once you establish this connection, right, the next step is to set up the data, right? So now here, what I'm going to do is there are various options available. I'm going to leave these by default, but in case you wanted to kind of optimize this, there are certain things that you could do. You could select all these fields, right, that are available right now. So whenever this trigger is created, only the data that you have selected over, only the fields that you have selected over here, the data would come up. So there are 145 items or 145 elements that can be selected, right? And not all are useful within a recipe, right? So you could have a way to select only the fields that you want to use in the recipe, right? And the other piece is that since I've selected the new contact in HubSpot, the connector is smart enough to kind of go and introspect that system to which I've connected to, right, and get those values out, or these fields out for me to kind of use over here, right? I could use a trigger condition as well, just to optimize this recipe as such, but I'm going to leave this as it is for simplicity cases, right? So once I do a save, right, I have established my trigger point and a connectivity to the source application, right? So now let's try to replicate this data that might come into Reltio, right? So again, in this case, now I'm going to create certain actions, right, which is how your actual recipe or the integration would work with. And like we did it in trigger, it always starts with selecting a connector, right? And since it's going to be a simple recipe, I'm going to use Reltio as a connector to which I want to connect to. And so here you can see there are various APIs that we have abstracted from the Reltio system and provided those APIs in the form of simple operations that you can do, right? So whether it's adding a record to an entity, creating a new record like an entity or an interaction or a relationship. If you want to delete records, you could do that. There's search and get APIs that can be called, and then the match and merge operations being selected, right? So there are various APIs that we have completely abstracted for you to kind of build out those integrations in a simple manner, right? So in this case, since we're going to create a new record, let's go ahead and select the create record operation or an action. And then the next step is to establish the connection. So again, in this case, I have already established the connection to this particular tenant, but I'm going to simply show how you can build out a new connection as well. So so when you say create new connection, you need to provide certain parameters. In this case, the environment URL, which would be the test. So the way you could do is go to your dashboard and then use the environment that you see over here, test-usg, right? The tenant ID and the way you want to authenticate your recipes, right? So you can either use a client authorization, and if you do so, you need to provide the client ID and the secret. And alternatively, you could also use a user credential, a service user that can be created for running those integrations, right? And in your case, for the custom authorization, it will always be yes, and you need always select the production as an environment for the authorization service, right? And once you do a connect, it will establish a connection to this particular tenant, and that's where you would select the next step. So in this case, I'm going to select the existing connection. And once I do that, you kind of now come to the setup process, right? So this is again similar to what we did at Trigger, but here the actual setup would be to kind of establish what you want to do with the data that's coming out of this trigger, right? So in this case, I want to create a new record, which is going to be an entity, right? And now what's happening is basically the connector is going into this tenant and investigating or finding out all the objects that are available. So there's organization, contact, employee, product, everything is available as part of this tenant configuration, right? So in this case, what I want to do is create a new contact. And now it will offer me all the fields that are available for this contact, right? So let me quickly select the fields that I want to use for applications, right? So for simplicity cases, I'm just using the crosswalk type as well as just the name, right? And once I select this, the next step is to basically map these fields. And to map these fields, there's this recipe data that's available, right? And this is nothing but the output of the step one, right? In this case, since we have only 2 steps, I want to map the data from a previous step, which is step 1, into step 2. So just make sure that you are selecting the output of the correct step before you start mapping the fields, right? So since it's going to be a simple integration, I can provide a value for the crosswalk type. And in case of value, I want to map it to the contact ID, right? So since I knew the schema, I know that there's a contact ID. And there are 2 ways you can map this. Either you can drag and drop this field over here, or the other easy way would be just select this value and then say contact ID. So this value kind of comes over here and the mapping gets created, right?
Hey, Guarav, I have a few questions, but
sure.
And so, and Sandro, okay, Sandro, thanks. And then, can you add a nested attribute so we can see the mapping for that? Is that possible or no?
Yeah, sure. So nested attribute would be like an. Okay, let me see if there's an email. Let's do an email. Right. So yeah, so this is the nested attribute over here. I can show the email mapping as well. Let me add one more field as well, since I've added email.
I love it. Just right on the fly.
Let me also bring in lead source. Oh, okay, an email type. Apply changes, right? So now, okay, so let me do some mapping here. The first name. Right, so can drag and drop, or last name. Okay, let me do this as well. Right, last name, and I'm just doing a simple transformation over here, which is to provide a full name as well, which will be nothing but a concatenation of the first name and the last name, right? So just to show some sort of a transformation as well. Now within the email as well. Now I'm going to, although let's see, personal, and the email that I want to map is this one, right? Now, again, the question was, how do we map these nested attributes? This is one way, right? The other way is if you have a list of values, and we'll come to that as well in the next demo, wherein I'm going to show how you can load a list, right? You need to map the list over here. But if let's say if you had multiple values, you could go to, let's say, a fixed list and start adding line items, right? So if you do that, so I can do a work, rather let me do this first. Email, right? Add another item, and now I can say work email, which I want to map to this particular, right? So now for the nested attribute of email, I have two values. For one is the work email and the other one is the personal email, right? And lastly, I want to map the lead source, which is over here, right? So I've done a simple mapping of all the fields, I've done some transformation, mapped a nested attribute, right? Just save this, and once you do that, the recipe is saved, and it's ready to be tested, right? So let me quickly go and create a new contact. So this is my work HubSpot account, or this is a trial account that I've just created. What I'm going to do is basically go and create a new account, right? But before I save that, I'm going to run that recipe and show how this works. So let me just quickly capture some data.
In Guarav, as you kind of go through this, there are several more questions, but we can do that later, a little bit later, or we can do that now. It depends on.
Yeah, we can do that now. That's okay. Yeah, just give me a second,
Sure.
Chris. So, so before I run this create mode, just wanted to quickly show this again.
Okay.
So a simple way to test this out, without starting or running this recipe, is to kind of test it out. So within the same build and test case itself, you can build the recipe while you are testing it. So it kind of that iteration becomes like really easy, right? So now that testing that recipe, I can create this contact, right? And the contact gets created, and this should basically be picked up by this recipe, right? So now this recipe is a polled recipe, right? It's not a recipe that runs on a real-time event. The reason being, the trigger has been configured or created that way for this particular connector, right? So instead of waiting for another 4 minutes, what I'm going to do is check now, so that it kind of goes and picks up that event, right? Yeah, so now if you see, it has already picked it up and has successfully executed the job, right? So now within the test mode itself, I can quickly check that the event has been completed, or the recipe has been completed. It has picked up the new account that we just created, which is James Butt, right? And on the Reltio side, it has went ahead and created this new object, and you can monitor here itself in the job, right? So let's quickly go and see, quickly refresh. And you can see that there's a new account that has been created, and these are the email addresses that we just provided. There was no work email, only a personal email, so you don't see that value over here. And then on the crosswalk side, you'll see that this has been created for the HubSpot crosswalk. Right. So yeah, Chris, I can take a question now.
Yeah, and Ashish mentioned that he wanted to add a reference attribute as well, although we've gone through that. Is that a possibility
Yeah.
to do that in the future? Okay. And then April says, if Reltio action isn't listed, do we have the ability to add a new one?
So we have a generic action available within the Reltio connector, right? So if there is no action right now available, there are two options. One is you can use the generic action within the Reltio connector to connect to that particular API. The other option is that you request us through our idea place, wherein we can consider creating that new action within the connector as a separate operation. Right. But yeah, there is a generic connector that can be easily consumed to connect to something that's not available right now.
Okay. And then how can we ensure if email ID is blank, then type should not be added as orphan?
Okay, yeah, so that is within the recipe configuration. So here, what you could do is dot present, right, and then you do then you kind of use this conditional statement, right, dot present, and then either you do supply
It should
a
be on
null
the
value.
type, right?
Yeah, right. So again, yes, you can use in the type or even the email as well, because if there is no email, you don't want to provide the type as well, right?
Right. Thanks.
So yeah, so you can use these conditional statements available as part of the transformation as well.
Great. So are you going to cover multi-value, the multi-value field in this or no? Because somebody,
so this is
yeah.
Okay, yeah, so the multi-value field is also similar, right? So what you could do is you can pass in I think the multi-value fields should be, okay, maybe I can get back to you on this. There was some sort of a setting that needs to be done, but yeah,
there is a way to
the multi-value,
do that, right?
yes,
Okay,
right,
cool.
Exactly.
Can we configure data quality checks in these integrations?
Yes, so any sort of data quality checks can be performed, right? So you can use a regression expression in case you want to use that. In case you want to connect to a third-party application through, if the pre-built connector is available, or through an HTTP connector, which would do some sort of a quality checks for you to do, you could do that, right? So there are various permutations and combinations available as to what kind of data quality checks or validations that you might want to perform.
Okay, and then if a source column has multiple values separate by a delimiter, so example, phone 1, phone 2, phone 3, is there a way these can be mapped to 3 instances of phone, or this requires, or does it require splitting phone in 3 columns?
Yeah, so it will definitely require, so again, it depends on how you want to capture that multiple phone numbers into Reltio, whether those are like within the same attribute, or whether those are multiple values for the same attributes. So if it's the latter, you need to kind of separate it out in the columns, not in the source file, but even in inside the recipe itself. So there is some sort of a logic that needs to be built. I have that reusable logic. Maybe if time permits later on, I can open that up. But definitely, it's possible, and we have tried that out. We might publish that as part of the community library itself, so that such use cases can be easily handled.
Okay, and I'm not sure if this is part of the scope, but can we see how export the data, or can we see how the export the data out of Reltio and store in a file or table? Are we going to see that today, or?
So that was not part of the scope. I was planning to do the data inputs, but what we could do is, as part of the community please post this question, and we'll build a sort of a recipe and show that within the community response itself. Right.
Okay, and then the last question, and then I'll leave you alone for a minute. How about custom attributes? So is that possible, or is that the question, Chandu?
I'm not sure what custom attributes are we talking about.
Yeah, let's just keep going. But
okay,
Chandu, feel free to add more information in your comment. So thanks, Guarav.
okay.
So Guarav,
yeah,
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So custom fields, like, it's more like a derived field, kind of, if the value is this, so instead of doing the direct mapping from source to target, just derived a field actually. Can you do that?
So you mean to say,
let's say if the kind of you say, okay, if the value comes as a male, actually, then we need an email address. If it comes with a female, then we need a fax number. I'm just throwing that. Okay, it's like more like a value does not exist. You want to kind of derive something new.
Yeah, so again, this is a very flexible system. You can derive values of hard code values in the sense, right? So as I mentioned over here, right, you can, for example, I'm just giving an example over here. You can bring in these conditional statements, right? So I'm just taking this as an example. Okay, just bear with me, right? You can build out such logic wherein it checks whether the work type is available or not, right? And if it's not available, then there's a true and a false value, right? So this is the true value, and this is the false value, or the other way around. So this is one way of building out these connectors. So there are various kind of expressions that you can build, various kinds of formula that you can use within the field itself to check whether the values are available or not, or whether the value has a specific, or rather the field has a specific value or not, right? And the other thing that you can do, not just within this field, is within the recipe itself, right? So that was going to be my next use case, wherein what I want to do is, for example,
so before you go to next use case, just one simple question I would ask that, and I think somebody did ask whether you answered that or not. That, for example, you are hard coding the work versus personal, actually. Can you do the RDP lookup, right? So reference data lookup, actually.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So there are various. So if you can see on the tools over here, on the left hand side, there's this lookup table. You can use the lookup values created within within your application. So here you can define what is the value in which system as to what. Right? The other way is you can use the RDM values as well. I'm not sure what kind of lookup you want to set up, but then there are multiple ways available for you to build out those lookup scenarios for you to consume in your recipe.
Thank you.
Great. And there are a few other questions, but I'm not going to ask them yet. So just keep going, and we've got 15 minutes or so.
Okay, so yeah, I'll be quick. Lastly, I just wanted to show a couple of things over here. So again, this is a simple data replication, right? But we want to bring in some new complexity as well, right? So for example, once the contact is replicated into Reltio, I want to make sure that the URI that gets generated goes and sits back into the HubSpot system, so that a user who goes and creates this particular contact knows that this has actually been replicated. And one of the ways is that I've created this custom field for contact, and it's called Reltio ID. So once this contact gets replicated into Reltio, the URI that gets generated will be distributed back into HubSpot application for the same system, right? So this is a simple logic you can build or extend. For example, once the cleansing has happened, you want to distribute that cleansed data back into the HubSpot system, right? So you can build out some sort of a conditional mechanism over here, right? So again, just talking about this, there are various other operations that you can perform, whether it's repeat action or or you want to handle errors in certain cases, and we'll come to this in a bit by the end of this session, right? So in this case, let's say, I want to build out a simple connection wherein, again, I'm going to use the previous steps to just make sure every time that you're mapping the fields from the correct step, right? So URI is present, right? Then I want to go back and update the same contact, right? So in this case, I'm going to use the contact email that was used to search for this, right? So I'm going to, for simplicity reason, I'm going to use the same email address that we earlier used, right? And the field that I want to update is a Reltio ID field, right? So in this case, I select the Reltio ID, but this time I want to select the record from step 2, the output of step 2, which is this URI, right? So I just switch that. Here's the Reltio field, and I select this. So what this would now do is, once the contact gets created, it will check for the URI, and if it's present, then it will go and update the HubSpot. But if it's not present, I want to kind of log the message, right? So for example, contact not created, right? And then lastly, I want to stop this job because I don't want to do anything further unless my contact gets created, right? So this is a simple way of building out some sort of a logic or some sort of a transformation or orchestration for you to build out within the recipes, right? I'm now going to test this around because I want to save some time to show another example, which I've already built in, which is in case of a bulk data imports, right? And there are a couple of aspects that I wanted to point out before I take these questions. The first one is, again, this is a scenario wherein we are loading data in bulk and we're reading this data from an Amazon S3 S3 bucket. So there's a file that gets loaded into an S3 bucket, and I want to pass that file, convert that data into a Reltio consumable format, and then load that data into Reltio in bulk, right? So a couple of aspects you should consider is, when you are building out such a recipe, since you're going to load this data in batch, you are going to consume the create organization in bulk or create records in bulk operation, right? In which the data is going to be passed in a certain batch, and you define this batch in your for loop. So for example, if this Amazon S3 file had 100,000 records, you're going to run or call these Reltio operations in bulk of, let's say, or in a batch of 100. In this case, I've defined a batch size of 10, but you could do it for a batch size of 100, right? So every time the Reltio operation or the Reltio create organization API gets called, 100 or in this case 10 records would be passed, and those 10 or 100 records would be created, and then the next operation would perform. So, right, so basically creating a loop which would run through all the rows within the file, create a batch of 10 or 100, and then pass those 10 records, right? So while you're doing that, just make sure that you're passing the list input, which is the file output of this, and within the create organization in bulk, you're passing the values from step 3, which is the entire batch of that is being read within that loop. Unless you pass this batch, your APIs would not be creating those 100 records or those 10 records in bulk. It will just create one record which has been mapped. At the same time, you also make sure that the mapping that you have created is from a previous step, in this case step 3, wherein you have defined the for loop, right? And make sure that the step number over here, and in this case, for this particular batch is the same. Only then you will find that all the records are being created in batch and in a particular order. Right. So just simple stuff, but all these are like prone to errors and kind of help you out building such recipes out. Right. Questions, Chris, so far on this?
There's a question before. There's not a lot coming in anymore, but so kind of on that question that we weren't sure about, there's some clarification on the how about custom attributions? Will this recipe over custom attributes be automatic, or do we do anything additional to map those things?
So again, what you see over here is, let's say, when I click on these optional fields, all these fields are coming from your Reltio metadata, right? So once you've established the connection to your Reltio tenant, the connector will introspect the tenant and bring in all the objects that have been created, whether it's standard objects or custom objects, including all the fields that are available within those objects, again, standard or custom. Right? Irrespective of that, you can map any of these fields to your source field. Right? I hope I've answered that question, but if not, then maybe you can post that specifically on community and we can discuss it over there.
Yeah, and if any questions aren't answered or that you might think of later, just go to community.reltio.com, create a login, and then login and ask. Can we use normalized input to create an entity?
I might have to get back to this on this, but yeah, something that would also help is some more details on what you mean by normalized inputs. So it would be helpful if you could post that question on the community, and I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah,
that.
Great. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So since we are running to the end of the session, I just wanted to give you a few tips, whether when it comes to troubleshooting and finding out the errors, right? So one of the things that you can do, and I'll show it in the system as well, to configure a job history report, right? What this would do is basically help you identify the events that have occurred and troubleshoot those events. So for example, if a lead is not getting replicated from your HubSpot to Reltio, and somebody asks you that, go and check out this particular lead, it has not replicated, please help me fix that issue, and things like that. So in such cases, it would be easier for us to identify those leads or those events easily within the job history, right? And I'm going to show that over here, how you can basically do such. No, okay. So in this case, so if you go to any of these recipes, right, there's a job history that gets created, and you can see that in the job history logs, right? And so you can see by default, what you would see is basically a timestamp and the description, right? And this is not really very helpful when it comes to identifying or triaging issues, when it occurs, right? So an easy way, before you actually start this recipe or deploy this recipe in a production system, is to customize such job reports, right? Wherein, again, you can define what columns you want to see in that report, right? So for example, you want to see the contact name, right? Just for an ease of finding out the leads, right? So the other thing that I might want to do is lead ID, right? In that case, and again, as you can see, I'm using the recipe data, right, to kind of create that report oops, it's contact ID. Yeah, right. And once I do this, I can easily deploy this, and now onwards, whenever I run this recipe, right, it will show me the contact name and the lead ID. So in case any of the job fails and you want to identify, and somebody asks you that, this particular lead has not replicated, you can come back over here and easily search for this name, right? So I've already created something previously. I can show that just to give you a short demo on what leads to Reltio. Hopefully this has it. So this report gets generated only after you have executed the recipe, right? So all the previous ones after, or rather, this report gets generated only after you have created this particular view, right? All the previous job runs would not show the data because this view did not exist. But once the view exists, you will see that the data starts coming in, right? And then let's say somebody said that my lead for Brian did not get replicated, you can easily search for that event and then go into the details of this job and try to troubleshoot and find out why this job failed, right? And an easy way to kind of troubleshoot some scenarios. Right? The other aspect, when it comes to error handling and as a best practice, as some of our developers use exception handling, right? So there are mechanisms available within the recipe building process itself, wherein you can monitor the recipe for certain sort of errors and then try to handle those errors, right? And the way you handle those errors depends on what kind of errors you're facing. But again, it's a good practice to kind of identify those in advance and then kind of accommodate how you want to handle within the recipe, right? So the first one is the transient error. These are some sort of a temporary errors like API timeouts, rate limits, or an HTTP 429 errors that might occur, right? And in such cases, you might want to rerun the failed jobs after waiting for a certain seconds, right? Similarly, there are transient or rather semi-transient or unrecoverable errors, right? And for both these kind of errors, the practice is that you create some sort of a log, make sure that the notifications are sent out, and then if once the issues are resolved, you could go back and rerun those jobs to kind of replicate that data. And then there are certain examples that you can see for both these type of exceptions, right? But just to quickly explain how this particular thing works is
and before you do it, look, I know we're out of time,
yeah,
but you can keep going, Guarav. This is being
Mhm.
recorded, and I think he just has a few things going on. Please go to community.reltio.com. This will be posted on the community. Additionally, if you have additional questions, please post those questions there. I really do appreciate it. And again, I'm going to keep this going. Go ahead, Guarav.
Sure. So I'm quickly showing a way to handle these errors. No, sorry, not this one. Okay, maybe you would have seen that there is something called as monitor. Yeah, okay. So here it is. So what I'm doing over here is I've created a sort of an exception handling, right? Now I can do this for the entire recipe. So all the steps that I have within the action or a certain section of the recipe, which could be prone to errors, right? So what I'm doing is basically monitoring. So this is again a default connector available within Reltio, right? So within this monitoring, I'm monitoring all these steps, and if anything happens within these steps, my exception handling would be triggered, right? So for transient errors kind of thing, right? So HTTP 429 error or an API timeout error, you might want to define that you want to retry this recipe, and you can define as to at what frequency the retry could happen, like whether it's a within 2 seconds, 5 seconds, or 10 seconds, right? And then there are conditional checks as well that you can perform, right? So retry if, and then you can provide the conditions, right? And then for some sort of a non-transient or unrecoverable errors, you can continue with steps like 13, 14, and 15, wherein you can define what you want to do with the handles, whether you want to log or send an email to an output to somebody, right? There are other ways as well to, for example, create a Slack message or connect to PagerDuty and send out a notification on PagerDuty, right? So various kind of handling can be done within this this try-catch mechanism, so to speak, right? And before I end, last but not the least is the recipe lifecycle management. This is an easy way for you to kind of build the recipes in your dev or a test environment and then deploy those recipes into a production environment. So there's this tool called recipe lifecycle management, wherein you can export out the content of a recipe, which would include all the underlying dependencies like lookup tables, connectors, and anything else that is being used within that recipe. And then in the destination systems, like a production tenant, you can again open the recipe lifecycle management, use the import package option, and then upload that that zip file that was previously downloaded from the using the export mechanism. So this is also an easy way for you to kind of build out the recipe in your dev or a test environment, test it thoroughly, and then once you are good to go, you can then deploy it into your production system and then start using this recipe. Okay. So this is all what I had. In case you want to, get into more details, there is a detailed blog available. Please go and refer to our Reltio documentation, as well as there's a training content already available on Reltio Integration Hub, which goes into much more depth than I went into for various other topics as well. Right. With this, I want to thank you all. In case there's some time, I can take questions or
there's no time, but this was excellent. I think it was a good kind of first step deep dive, if you will. I know somebody did say, Ashish, it was a great session. Thanks. Hoping for more such more webinars like this with more complex recipes. So I think, as we kind of look at the first of the year, we'll start kind of seeing what we can do and getting Guarav and other people out there to really kind of show some of these more complex recipes and things like that. So just keep that in your head. But thank you everyone for attending today. Again, go to community.reltio.com. I will have the webinar recorded and everything else, and then please ask your questions there. And until the next webinar comes out in a couple of weeks, I think that one's going to be on Salesforce connector. So we'll have 2 in the same week. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Guarav, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye.